we're going to give you a quick overview of DTC, and then we're going to jump into the details around the new features and demos. So dynamic load balancing with RTD and SNMP, the multi-tier health check support feature. Those are both in 8.2, but since you haven't seen them yet, we wanted to bring those forward today. And then the service record support, state persistence, CSV, which I know is important to several customers, and then the independent backup. We'll also be talking about our government cloud certification, and then we'll wrap up with some Q&A. So why don't we go ahead and jump right into the DTC overview. So Joe, why don't you help us kick things off? Can you give us a little idea of what DTC is? And let's jump in and talk about that.
Certainly, Bob. So yeah, so folks, from a high level, our DTC is basically a global server load balancer. Okay, we like to use the term intelligent DNS.
Right. So so Joe, you were saying that really it's around load balancing and directing clients to the best available server for availability and performance. But can you go into a little more detail now about how it works?
Sure. So unlike a traditional load balancer, which is normally is going to return the IP address of the VIP of that load balancer itself, what we do is we actually perform all of the health checks against the server being queried, and we return the IP address of the most suitable or the ideal server. And again, we do this based on different health algorithms, different routing algorithms, client location, which we'll get into a little bit more detail as we go on. One of the things that's definitely unique to us is the ability to really route users based on their location, as seen within our tight integration with our IPAM database, the IP address management database, making use of a feature or function that we call extensible attributes. Right? And again, we'll get into a little bit more details on that as we go.
Right. So for the folks that are on the call today, if we address quickly what's in it for them, can you address that for us?
For sure. So, again, I mean, the biggest reason that most customers are going to implement global server load balancing is for availability. Okay. So things like uptime on a server, you want to ensure that when a user does a query to a server, that server is going to respond correctly. Okay. Now, we do have several means of, ensuring uptime, with our various health monitors. One of them is obviously, being able to use our tight integration with our DNS and IPAM. And as far as performance goes, you'll see the term here on the slide. You'll see it coming up, a few times in the future as well. LBDN really stands for load balanced domain name. So anytime we create an LBDN server, we can efficiently route those, using several global methods. A couple of the things that are they're also extremely helpful, for Infoblox customers that are implementing DTC are, number one, the single UI. Okay, now this is really critical because implementing traditional load balancing solutions, you most likely have multiple servers. You may have multiple interfaces. There's no real way to tightly integrate those. There's no way to integrate those into your IPAM network, so where users are actually coming from. So the advantage that we bring with our grid management is to be able to centrally manage not only IPAM, DNS, but also the global server load balancing functionality. Combine that with our built-in reporting, which we'll touch on as well. We've got a very powerful solution. And as far as deployment goes, extremely simple. For customers on the line that have actually deployed this already, you'll know that it's literally nothing more than enabling a license on the appropriate DNS servers that you want to run the DTC functionality, and extremely cost effective. You'll see that on the slide we've got the value circled. We're basically providing somewhat 80 to 90% of the functionality at about 20% of the cost of a traditional load balancer.
Joe, that's really outstanding. So if we look at really more around the value that DTC delivers, there are certainly problems that many companies face. One is around slow apps, because obviously the knock gets lit up, right? As soon as the apps slow down, you get lots of complaints. But DTC improves the user experience and certainly helps to deliver the type of performance that you would expect in a global server load balancer. Can you walk us through a couple of these points and explain, how that's important?
Certainly, yeah. So, your comments are absolutely true. Typically when users want to go to a particular server, whether it's an internal web server, some kind of a database server, externally, an e-com server, you want to make sure that it's going to return a response, right? And it's going to respond quickly. Typically when it doesn't, again, like you mentioned, fast complaints, users are going to call in, say, hey, there's something wrong with the application, something wrong with the network. When, in actual fact, it may just involve in, something as being routed to the non-appropriate server, right? So on the intranet side, again, being able to use our unique direct tie into IPAM to easily determine where that user is coming from, is a huge factor in ensuring that we route users to the most appropriate server, one that's going to perform and respond the best. Typically, smaller applications can actually use DTC just as a basic server load balancer. Some other use cases, things like the case for DR sites. So, being able to automatically recover from an internal application failure, or even on the external side, being able to perform DR functionality across data centers. Right? Again, so it's a great solution for that. On the internet side, again, we do have GeoIP functionality built right into the solution as well. So combining GeoIP with our extensible attributes to provide user location, things like that, we are actually able to meet a lot of the privacy challenges of the European Union's GDPR privacy challenges, in that we can limit where users are actually directed to. So, for example, if you decide that you need a user to always be directed to a server within a particular country or city, we can very easily do that with our routing policies. And the final thing is our health monitors. We've got extremely flexible server health monitors, anything from HTTPS, SNMP, and we're going to get into details on some of the newer ones that we've added as well. The whole idea here is to make sure that we never direct users to application servers that aren't performing at their best.
And the beauty with a lot of these new monitors is when you added in things like our SNMP monitors, it eliminates a lot of the requirements of even needing load balancers, because a lot of what load balancers are doing is determining which server to send it to. And with the SNMP health checks, we can talk to a server and find out all these things about its health and its number of connections, and then go, oh, well, if that's the case, then we're going to hand out, these other addresses, not that one, and kind of, maybe potentially eliminates that tier.
Yeah, that's really good. One of the things we talked about just a moment ago is, the capital and the operating costs associated with having 2 or more servers. Obviously, not only it's the acquisition cost, but then you have to, once you install them, you have to maintain them, and certainly that can mean a lot of headaches. Joe, what about the Infoblox solution? Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so I mean, we've touched on some of these points in the past, but I'll elaborate a little bit. Again, on the licensing model, like I mentioned earlier, it's literally a license that gets enabled on an appliance. So there's no additional hardware that's needed, to get this to get the functionality enabled within an Infoblox grid. Provisioning this is literally 10 to 20 minutes is all that's needed to get this set up and running. I can't emphasize enough how the huge advantage we have from the single UI. So being able to have a single interface, streamlined, being able to manage, instead of having to manage multiple independent servers, we can do it all as one solution, and easy to use, as you'll see in during some of the demos that Scott is going to bring up. It's literally point and click. We've got a lot of good visualization tools and even some built-in testing tools.